It's episode 95 of the Improv London podcast. I'm your host, Stuart Moses, and this week's guests are Charlie Gascoyne and Joe Thompson.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, yeah.
I'm very well. I'm warm.
Yes, it's very warm here. Would you like to explain to listeners where we are?
We are at, for a minute then I thought we were going to do like one word at a time. I think I've been doing improv for so long now, I'm looking for the game in every conversation. But yes, we're at the British Improv Project weekend.
We are, which is in Melton Mowbray,
yes, home
of the pie. It's famous for its pies, and now it's improv, so that's nice.
Yeah.
Is this your first time you've been here?
It's your first, isn't it?
Yes, this is the first one I've been to.
It's my second, and the first one I went to was the first one, before it was even technically the British Improv Project.
Wow.
It was the first one that was put together, and it was in Edale in a hostel.
Right.
So when I came up the drive here, I turned to Tom and I said it was like seeing someone from high school and realising how hot they got. Because it's just radically changed.
Yeah.
This place is so nice.
Yes.
A lovely little country, I want to say villa, even though I know it's not. It's that kind of vibe.
I'm thinking manor house.
Yes, no, that's more. That's way closer to what I mean.
It is weird because the setting's very Downton Abbey, and yet all you've got is people walking around in black improv t-shirts with their club name on them, in jeans and sunglasses, very hungover. And the two different TV shows just collide. Skins meets Downton. It's just a weird combination.
Yes, keen-eared listeners may notice that we're all sounding a little bit on the husky side, so I apologise for that now. But it's been an intense 24 hours in a really good way. So what's the appeal of the British Improv Project?
It's such a good way of meeting people, which I know sounds like a cliche, but genuinely you can end up in such a bubble when you do improv that you see the same people day in, day out, and you improvise with the same people. And you get complacent, and what's great is that you can turn up to these and meet a million people at a million different levels, and it's challenging. You challenge yourself, you challenge other people.
Particularly up north where we are, that's a real threat, is that the groups, I think we have plenty of improv up north, but for some reason there's less in terms of like a set system of connection. So you could somewhere like London, from my distant experience of it, because it is so distant. Where I am in Sheffield, it's not even really feasible to do the train to London for the weekend, without spending so much money. It's ridiculous. It therefore feels up north very separate, because there aren't central teaching places, there aren't central meeting places, jam places. Every city has their own tiny little ecosystem, and we occasionally try and reach over to Manchester from Sheffield, or we reach over to Leeds, but it does feel super, everyone feels far away. And so coming to something like this and reminding ourselves...
You may be able to hear the sound of a tractor outside. That's how much in the countryside we are. If I was more professional, I'd insist that we shut the windows, but it is too swampy.
It's very warm.
Like the sound of tractor would be replaced by the sound of just waterfalls of sweat.
What a delightful image that is. And you're both teaching workshops.
We are, yes.
Do you want to tell me about those?
Yeah, so despite the weather, I'm doing a physical theatre workshop because I like to torture people. And yeah, that's been really fun. It's sort of it was initially sort of split into 3 parts, but it's sort of quite a 50-50 split, I guess, between quite theatre-y based stuff, sort of physicality of character,
you had
physicality
me at
of status. Yes, come with me if you want to Brecht. And it's a very much kind of performance skills in theatre that you can apply to improv. And then the second half is my baby. It's my sheer joy in life, which is, what ridiculous shape can I put my body in for comedy? I'm really looking at being a prop, and being either an inanimate prop with a function, or being a prop with a voice, which led to a very interesting tableau today where everyone was a toaster with a different personality. So that's been fantastic. Very warm, but very fun.
Yes, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed, because I've been an object before, but breaking it down into animate and inanimate was a distinction that I hadn't made before, so that's really interesting. I also enjoyed the way in which you talked about stereotypes of, the king, the queen, and the fact they lead with different parts of their bodies. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that.
Yes, and luckily, the man who brought that particular activity to me is actually sat right next to me, is Joe.
So you've done. I didn't actually know this. You've done the ogre. That's fantastic, because I actually taught that exercise at the first weekend.
Well,
that's amazing.
I remember you teaching it me, and while I didn't do the exercise itself, it's basically it's a weird thing to describe over podcast form because it's such a physical thing, but it's basically looking at kind of how you indicate character and status from sort of the way you hold your body. So the kings are very high and everything's leading sort of with the head, and the lower down the pecking order you go, the more you physically go down and you show it. And while they're sort of very specific ye olde archetypes, you'd be amazed how many characters that you play spontaneously that you think is a very organic and original character is actually just, it does and will fall under one or more of those archetypes.
Absolutely. I really like those characters. I really like using them. They're really good because they will always be visually impacting, and something that can be very easy to do in improv is to come on and be two people in different parts of the stage looking at each other.
Yes.
And so to physically morph the body is actually something that's quite important in improv, so that every time two people stand up on stage, something looks different. It looks like we're moving forward. In theatre, you change set, you add prop, you add and you take away, because you have that pre-control, you have that rehearsal process to look at the visual impact of it. But improv, you don't have that, so you have to implement techniques to have that visual aspect always changing, always interesting, always engaging.
Yeah, and it was really that sort of got mentioned today and brought up, and yeah, so I'm glad you liked Joe's thing that I stole.
It's just delightful that Joe was here to talk about it.
Joe has become the sneaky student who steals things.
Who you've learned from. It's all good. And Joe, you are also teaching a workshop here?
Yes, I'm doing. I was going to say a basic game workshop, but I don't think so often. So I'm teaching game, and I have a lot of opinions about game, because I feel like game is sometimes is so misunderstood. And I met people who are like, "Oh, I don't like game. I don't like doing game. I'm never very good at finding the funny thing." And I instantly want to kind of grab them by the ears and go, "You've completely misunderstood game entirely." Because it's so often seen as finding funny things in the scene, being funny. Game can so often become shorthand for just being funny. It's finding the joke as opposed to finding the game. So one analogy that I keep using all weekend is game is not only in comedy. For example, game turns up in Harry Potter, because within Harry Potter you have a fairly normal world, and yet a truth that they unearth in that world is the fact that wizards exist. Simple truth they establish at the beginning. The rest of the series touches back on this truth. The game is, if wizards exist in this world, then what might be true about the society that they live in that has to hide and live in secrecy? Now, at no point is that played for laughs, but we explore this truth about the world that we are reading just by it touching back on it again. And we delight in returning and learning new details about this world. And in many ways, that is what game is a certain kind of world building in a way. It doesn't have to be about things in the world, it can be things in the relationship or things in the character, but it's just a way we return to truths that we've unearthed. But it's so often, because there are so many well-used technical terms for it, like heightening, stakes, if-then, and they're all brilliant and very useful, but when you are thrown with all these terms, you will eventually all you'll hear is be funny, because that is so often what it's brought back to. And so people panic and think, oh, I'm not funny enough to know game, which is why my game workshop is actually stripping back a lot of the technicality and kind of returning very much to just the core, which is how do we detect patterns based on truths that we establish in scenes.
So, yeah, how do you do that?
So the way that I kind of do it is we have a couple of exercises that we do that are sort of basically forced games to kind of establish what you do when you recognise them. So I have one exercise I call workplaces, where you get everyone's involved in the game, everyone in the workshop's involved in the game, they can all get involved. 2 people are sort of the main characters in the scene that you create. One is an employer, the other is a new employee joining the workspace, and at some point in the first section of the scene, the person has to say, well, like any other workspace, but, and then establish a truth about the workspace. So we're like any other factory, but everyone's a little bit clumsy. And then we've unearthed that truth. We've begun the pattern, and everyone then knows all they need to do is come in and be a character in a workspace where everyone's a bit clumsy, and they can then begin to explore the different aspects of that. So maybe someone comes in and they're the accountant in the factory, and they keep dropping all their paperwork into the industrial shredder. Oh dear, off they go. They didn't have to think of something funny. They just had to think of, well, what different people might be in this workspace, but it ended up being funny because it connected, it touched back upon, and the audience love it. We also do an exercise where we basically, a character comes in to a scene, tells some kind of professional a problem that they have. The professional tries to help in character, but the performer basically tries to make the problem worse with everything that they do. And again, just unearthing this truth that this person isn't helping, and then just touching back upon that time and time again so that it becomes a recognisable pattern.
I think that's really great because it answers a lot of sort of questions for me, because when it comes to doing improv and sort of trying to be funny, you sometimes know yourself what might be funny in that moment, or you're able to identify what someone else has done that is funny and was funny. But people always say to me, like, oh, you know, you can't teach funny, like you can't, like when I mentioned about this weekend and people say, like, oh, how do you teach comedy? And it's quite a difficult thing because you go, well, I don't. Well, I do. Well, I don't. I don't know. And that's a really great way of explaining it, is it's how organic the joke is, how organic the joy of it is. Because for me, so much of improv is the situational comedy of it, the hilarity of improvising it itself. And I think exploring the game is such an important thing, because not only does it give you 1,000 opportunities as you know, as performers, as improvisers, but it becomes hysterical. And I think the audience start to build up, and they see, when they recognise the game, once you and the audience are on the same level, it's just pure joy. And I love seeing that. And
it happens in the workshops, which is why I love running game workshops, because it's so satisfying for me as a teacher and for everyone, because when people begin to get it, they get it so quickly and so rapidly. Characters, you're always working on characters, and don't get me wrong, you're always working on game, but it's that instant satisfaction that makes game very, very addictive, and you do begin to do it in your everyday conversation. You begin to detect patterns in everything that you're saying. You do begin to constantly refer back and touchstone back to this pattern that you began to develop. And it's an immensely satisfying part of improv. It's one of the things that I really, really find joy in doing.
Fantastic. You've convinced me of the importance of game. I was one of the people who said I didn't like it.
You should come to my workshop tomorrow.
Well, that sounds a marvellous idea. Cool. And you're both in a group called Strike?
Yes.
That's correct. Yes.
Tell me about that.
So we joined Strike.
Yes, so Strike, if I'm getting the history right, and apologies, Paul, if he can hear me. I'm sorry if I get the legacy wrong, but Strike was initially a student radio station.
Yes.
And they were kicked off student radio for their controversial behaviour.
Hence the name, because Strike, they had 3 strikes and they were out.
Not for anything dreadfully offensive or derogatory. I want to make sure we're not.
I think their final strike was they actually did a slightly improvised thing on the radio, where the improviser of the whole radio show was midway through like a zombie apocalypse, and it ended with the last character running out into zombie apocalypse, and they, for authenticity, they left the mic just on empty air for the rest of the night, which was their final strike, and they were kicked off this internet radio show.
So it kind of blossomed from there into sort of a maverick bunch, and it was a podcast for the longest time.
Yeah, just a podcast.
A comedy podcast, sort of, but it dealt with all sorts of tips and tricks and ridiculous things. And but now we've got Strike Comedy, the umbrella, which encompasses Strike Improv. So we've got our performing cast. And we've also got our podcast, which is now an improv podcast.
It's slowly, the improv is beginning to root itself into a lot of other things that we're doing. It's definitely the heart of now what Strike does. But it's very difficult to talk about because it very much isn't our creation. It's coming onto the train halfway through the journey. It's
a benevolent dictatorship is the way that Strike is explained, in that we're all a big part of Strike, but it's very much like it is what it is, and it's either you're in or you're out with it. It's wonderfully like freeing as sort of someone who's done like improv and the teaching to not worry about the teaching side of things. I'm able to turn up, be told what we're looking at today, and to improvise completely freely. So there's freedom of performance without a kind of a hierarchy to worry about.
I mean, we now do bits to help out beyond the improvising. We're currently trying to find venues and gigs and stuff. That's sort of our role between the two of us. Is find gigs that we can kind of tag along with, which is a remarkably hard thing to do, is finding non-improv gigs that'll go, sure, you can do a bit of improv.
Trying to convince any open mic night that they definitely need to give us a 35-minute slot with 6 people on a Wednesday night in the middle of Manchester.
But the prominent trio of Strike are all here this week, is Paul Beauchamp, and then sort of the two improv directors, the one who lead our workshops, are Alex Keane, who has done lessons at previous BIP weekends, and Bobby Anderson, who did the montage class at this one.
Who I'm very much hoping will be episode 96.
Fabulous.
He's wonderful.
Yeah, and he's been our kind of guide through it, and we do kind of share things around now as we're all starting to get more experience, and we're all starting to kind of we definitely show each other a lot of mutual respect, and people pick things up and lead their own things.
We all sort of knew each other as well through kind of our university improv society and other bits of comedy we got involved in. So we are kind of a ragtag bunch of sort of bits from other places, and just kind of and it's great because you get that kind of hive mind mentality, and it means that while the kind of improv we do is rule breaky at times, everything you thought you knew about improv, well, we'll frequently walk into a scene with a gun, asking a question, saying no.
Familiarity breeds rule breaking.
Absolutely.
It's all basic stuff. So we just begin to just. I think we had the biggest deviation from typical improv that we had with Strike was our basic format is like a one-word jump straight into a scene montage kind of thing. And we got the session of arm, and we were at the end of the show, and we were all a little bit tired. And I'd got the suggestion, and I just raised my arm and began staring at it. And Charlie came on stage and just licked my arm.
Damn.
And then suddenly everyone was licking each other on stage, and then we swept. Because we were like, that's done.
It was entirely non-verbal. It was one of those moments where the second Joe walked on, I was like, I'm a licking. And everyone else on the side went, yeah, that's the direction this is going in. And then everyone in the audience went, what the hell is improv? And we single-handedly took improv comedy back as a serious performance format 50 years in that single ridiculous moment. But it's not a cult, and that's the important thing to state about
it. It is bred out of kind of knowing the other performers, and you do find that's the point you can begin to experiment with the format so much more, because you skip over a lot of the rules because you don't need them, because you're familiar with the person and you know where they're going to go with different types of things that they're going to say. Yeah. So you can jump 3 steps ahead, and maybe you do deny them because you know what they're saying they want you to push back on.
Yes.
And so what to a normal performer might seem like a block, you're actually rolling into a dynamic that maybe you've done in other scenes and you go, this would work here. and just little things like that. It's not quite cheating it. It's not quite not improv, but it certainly has that. You find the familiar patterns that you usually fall into with certain performers, and so it means that sometimes you can just break a couple of rules, or sometimes you do just to keep things interesting.
So what if someone was on stage with you both, or either of you individually, what could they do to delight you?
I love high energy, because in everything I do and say is high energy. If anything, I need to learn to hold back. And when someone matches my energy, that's my absolute bread and butter. So if I can walk into a scene and storm something up and stir the pot, and someone to just hop in that tornado with me, it does make for some strange scenes. If no one's there to hold you back and play opposite you and sort of contrast you, you can find that things go from 0 to 10 very, very quickly. But that to me is that it's the most supported I could feel in that moment, is to someone to go, I hear exactly where you're coming from, let me get my running shoes on, let's take that road. And that for me is just pure joy.
I'm very, very similar, with probably the caveat as someone being on stage with me, as in if I like being on the back line, someone setting up a character that I can step into the shoes of. So there's a short film game that's all about this, actually. It was one of my faves, which is Our Mate Greg, and the game is two people on stage. They talk about one of their friends, and they just pimp a bunch of strange traits onto the character, and then someone has to come on as that character. And that's one of my favourite things to do, especially the more abstract the better. I think I once came in as a dinosaur that worked at a supermarket, and they were talking about the fact that dinosaurs worked at the supermarket, and everyone was sort of dancing around it, and I was like, I got such joy out of stepping in and being like, and I didn't say a word through the whole scene. I just made a series of different sounds, and that's the other thing people can do to delight me on stage, which is humour me. And when I come in with something very abstract and maybe not necessarily very supportive, which I will only ever do if I feel the person can handle it, but if I come in with a completely non-verbal character, for example, what I love about Strike is that they're able to then dance around that, and they will do all the legwork to allow for this wonderful character to remain, because I fell in love with the characters that I create. We have nicknames within Strike. We have little middle nicknames that we've all earned. Mine is Joe Characters Thompson, and so thankfully people know that I'm going to come in with abstract, unusual, wacky characters. Yeah. And so people, because they're all lovely in Strike, accommodate for that, and they build around the characters that I create to allow me to do that, which is very kind of them. They indulge me.
Cool. How did you discover improv? What drew you to it in the first place?
Once again, I'm sat next to the person responsible for.
Joe. Sorry, I thought you meant me.
I listened to Improv London, and I was inspired, and I took it up.
That's a story here. It's so often. I enjoyed every time.
We were at universities together, studying theatre, and Joe came to see me in a very poor production of some dreadful thing.
It was a university production.
Yes,
we both were in it.
It was,
and I saw your version, and you were doing a massively physical character.
I was playing an old lady, and it was every Julie Walters character ever combined into one screaming banshee, and it was absolutely insane. And for some reason, Joe went, you should come to do Shrimps, which is the Sheffield Improv Society, of which Joe at the
Sheffield
time,
University.
Sorry, the Sheffield Uni, of which you were artistic director.
At the time, I was artistic director. So my journey in is I actually fell in love with improv, as most people do, I imagine, watching Whose Line Is It Anyway. It was funny enough, when I listened to the episode that you had with Tom Young on, and I heard his story, it's remarkably similar. Watched Whose Line Is It Anyway, was desperate to find it. So when I went to university, part of my decision making to which university I went to was, did they have an improv group? Because at the time that was...
Yeah, because we sat next to each other in the introduction to to university life. Yeah. I don't know if you remember this. So it was like not even our first day of uni. It was like you'd had a little tour, and then we sat in the room and they played a moving video, and it was great about what you were going to become. And they gave us all a star, and it was like if you're going to do one thing, try one thing new. what's it going to be? And I didn't know what to write, so I just copied the person next to me, which happened to be Joe, who had written try improv comedy. So I'd gone, all right, loser. And I wrote try improv comedy, and I still have that star.
Wow.
And I eventually bullied her into doing it properly. But yes, so my thing is like, part of my decision making was like, because in many ways, university societies are the place that many people come into improv through. There are more places cropping up now where you can do it outside of that, but at the time I came in, that was what I believe was the way in. And so yeah, I found the Shrimps. I very quickly became a performing member, but I think that was mainly due to my previous theatre experience.
Right.
I'd already done quite a lot of theatre up to that point, and then went on to kind of lead there, and then launched off that into Strike, and that's where we are at the moment.
Cool. So what's it like being an improviser in Sheffield?
Interesting.
It's like watching a flower bloom,
Yes.
but slowly, and sometimes it feels like it's very slow, and sometimes it feels like it's speeding up.
It's great in a way. There's a lot of promise in Sheffield improv at the moment, and just the comedy scene in general in Sheffield, in that you're sort of a caretaker of it, in that it's, yeah, like you say, it's almost in its infancy, and there's so much good stuff going on, and it's easy to compare yourself to bigger cities with a lot more venues and things. So there is a lot of responsibility for us to create that scene around us. And it's getting there. Yeah, there's good stuff there.
The size of the city really does affect it, though. Like, so obviously to compare it to, I mean, places near and far, obviously places like Manchester, huge metropolitan area. On the other side of it is places like Leeds, another fairly big metropolitan area. And obviously some of the places where improv is really taking off at the moment and really becoming that place where it might go to the next level. London, Birmingham, I think, has got a really good scene.
Yeah.
Like, they're huge metropolitan cities. Sheffield is famously like somewhere, it's like technically a city, but it's basically a big village. And in many ways, the whole vibe's so villagey.
Yeah.
So it means people actually are weirdly conservative with what they would do in the evening. So you're competing with familiarity, and so it's very difficult to push people out those boundaries. And we do have a very diverse art scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the most theatres in one space outside of London. Like, it's the second most theatres in one space other than London. So it has performance at its heart, but sometimes you do have to really dig at it to get the audiences.
The performance scene splits into the very, very familiar Lyceum Theatre, has like big musicals and productions. The Crucible does Shakespeare, and like in most cities, there's then also the very underground, the very niche, the very hipster, and improv sits somewhere very in the middle. It's not familiar, but it's definitely not. Well, it is niche, but it's not making a large effort to be niche. So it has to say it wants you to be there because you find it fun, not because you find it trendy.
Right.
But it needs people to take a chance on it. So it sits in a very weird place, I always think, improv, because you're not necessarily going to... You want trendsetters to come and take interest in it, but it's also a very down-to-earth format. It's not trying to be... ooh, fancy, alt, I'm, eating raw chicken while staring directly down the camera. Very
you can win an
artsy.
audience over to improv once they've seen it.
Yes.
So I know, for example, my mum and dad, who, they're very theatre-y. I've sort of done theatre with them for sort of years. And when I started getting into the comedy side of things, they were so supportive, but had no idea what any of it was about. And they didn't have any idea what improv was. And it took a long time before they eventually saw me or anyone I knew doing it, and they were, oh, this is fantastic. Oh, we'd love to see more of this. And I think convincing someone to come and, and see improv can be the hard bit. Getting that regular audience and that reliable audience is tough. But I think you have that power to really get fans of it and get people on board. I mean, theatre and plays, people are or they're not a theatre goer, but most people will at least stomach a big production with a celebrity in it or a pantomime or whatever, whereas improv is, for some people, it's very niche and very, peculiar and maybe something they've never even seen, short of a bit of mock the week at the end kind of thing. So I think we're at a nice stage where hopefully we can build up a community that Sheffield's really proud of, because they have a thing that
Yeah.
not everyone else knows about, and it becomes sort of quite a nice little secret of ours.
And it is something that I want to secretly, one of my hidden agendas is to really find a way of fusing the Sheffield spirit into improv, because Sheffield has got its very, you meet people in Sheffield and they're you know, down to earth, very you know, all very lovely people, that very northern likability that sounds so. I've lived my whole life in the north, so I shouldn't speak about us like we're zoo animals,
friendly cavemen.
Yeah, but there is that certain element of there, you know, the north has this stereotype of being rough and gritty but innately likable. That's a perpetuated stereotype, but it is like,
it's a strength. It definitely is a strength.
It is a strength, and that down to earthness, that keeping it real, so to speak, and that just doing something because it's good and it's just like, you know, no frills, just high quality, is something I'd like to bring into our improv as well. And that's currently, a lot of our improv is that. It's not necessarily overly kind of gimmicky or frilly, it's just solid, high quality improv across the board.
Yeah, I think that's often the thing that I care about, is the presentation, because I like to see lots of different kinds of improv. But personally, I like to produce improv that perhaps you could even mistake for a sketch show at times, that you get scenes that are of a quality that you could take them out of context and play them. I think there's a lot of shared joy in improv. If it all goes wrong, it's still great. And but I think it's the cheesiness sometimes that perhaps does leave me a little cold. And I think it's more because I worry that it looks cheesy to an audience. And I think that kind of schlocky sort of... yes, we all did improv in university. I remember in my university troupe, and it all being a bit fake and a bit, you know, non-naturalistic. It's very easy to kind of fall down that rabbit hole. And I think having to start up that scene ourselves and sort of build that scene between us and the other groups in Sheffield means that we kind of can label the kind of improv that we're showing and sort of say, this is improv up north, it's hard hitting, it's real, come and see it, it's different. And you can brand it almost, you can brand it as a little bit
I should
different.
establish, we're not building this scene single-handedly. I realise the way we're talking, it sounded like we were trying to establish that we were, and that's not what we're trying not what we're trying to say. It's just more our motivation. But I completely agree, there's a level of like, there's something very nice about being in a relatively forming scene.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is groups have been in Sheffield for so long, but a scene is only just developing now, because I think you've got to have certain things for something to go from being a series of groups to a scene. And I think, weirdly enough, something that is very powerful is a jam. So Robert Anderson, him and Alex Keane, they made the jam together, the Sheffield Improv Jam, and that has done like huge things for the scene, bringing people together, giving people like a monthly place to come and meet. I think that's a huge thing about scenes, is having groups actually meet each other and sit down in the same room for
like
even a couple of hours. Yeah,
networking is vital to the existence of improv carrying on.
I mean, hanging out, like as much as it's been nice networking with people meet, I like hanging around with improvisers.
I think that's the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't differentiate between the two.
Yeah, I think I think the business world has made networking seem so hostile and horrible, but in reality it's just being with other people. But having that regular hangout spot, I think at the time we were trying to really push the improv scene. We also ran a monthly improv show. That was my baby, and it was horrible to have to eventually kill it off, but necessary. But I ran a show called Chucklenuts for a year, which was a monthly short form show, but every single one was a combination of members of different groups from across Sheffield.
That's interesting.
Just getting them playing with new people, but then just like putting it out there, like this is a sample of loads of different groups from Sheffield. Come and see what we have to show. And for the year that it ran, it brought
the
a lot of
venue held
interest.
it back. It was one of those things of it was great for improvisers to see, and it was also made for an incredibly good show because you got all the talent from all over Sheffield. But we were in a venue miles away from the city centre, who weren't that big on publicising it. It kind of your friends and family eventually do get sick of supporting you, which is fair.
In terms of coming to shows, not in terms of emotionally supporting.
I wasn't trying to suggest anyone's family was emotionally distant.
My family may have disowned me.
But yeah, it was great. It was a really nice example of that kind of universal language of improv that you call games different things, or you know, I've not heard that technique, but I've heard this one. And yet you get, just like at these weekends, you get a bunch of people together and we all speak the same language, and I think that's awesome.
Yes. Great. So what was the organisation behind getting different people? Because it's hard enough getting everyone that's in the same group together to perform.
Yeah.
Getting people from different groups, that seems complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I've herded less stressful cats. So what I basically did is social media, like as terrifying as social media is, it's so useful for improv. I stuck everyone who was interested. Not every member of every group was necessarily interested, but I went around all the groups and I was like, this is what I'm planning on doing. Do you have members of your group who would be interested? And everyone who said yes, I stuck onto one large Facebook group, and I used that group to go, this is when the show is, we're going to hold just the one rehearsal, because that's the benefit of working with established improvisers. You don't have to aggressively rehearse them together. You run through games, you make sure any games that you're not familiar with, you kind of touch over, kind of retread over, maybe teach people who are new to the games. But that's maybe an hour, 2 hours, and at the time I was at the tail end of my university years, so we could borrow the university rooms, which is super helpful. And then they just had to be available on the night. So in many ways, it's the same level of organisation that goes into like an open mic night. You just have to collect your people together, make sure they all know where and when they need to be. And I kind of dropouts were filled in with strike members. I would just turn to strike and go, well, we've had a last minute dropout, can one of you guys do it? Because it still fulfilled, as long as we were touching base with all the different groups and trying to get as many people there as possible. Regardless, we were going to put on a good improv show come hell or high water. And it was a really nice thing to do, because we did the only kind of thing that we did every single show is we did Quest.
Quest? What's that?
Quest is Sheffield, we've had various different groups centre around the idea of doing mid-form, between short form and long form, where they're short form style games but designed to be really long and to allow mainly scene building within them. That was really coined by Ryan, and I can't remember his second name, but Ryan from Caboodle Improv Theatre. He really pushed that for a while, and I was intrigued about it. But a game that really grew out of it, and I think this is from other places as well, but it is Quest, and you get a suggestion of a thing you need to go and get. And then you basically tell it by having one person travel between different scenes, then go get the thing, and then travel back through these different scenes as well. So what we would do is we'd have before the interval, the first half of that game, then we'd have a cliffhanger, and then we'd come and bring them back to that second half. So little things like that were really nice. And we really tried to make things as familiar as possible for the performers to reduce that necessity for rehearsal, and so that eventually just performing the shows would just become familiar.
Cool, that sounds great. And Charlie, you also do stand-up. Tell me about your stand-up. What sort of stand-up are you?
So it's a strange one. I sort of do a character, in as much that I don't particularly do kind of observational sort of stand-up. It's, at the moment, that my current one is I deliver a first aid course. It's not a very good one, but you can't tell me that. And a lot of the advice is, I have to put a disclaimer at the end of don't try this at home, because truly you would kill your friends or family. I'm quite interested in character improv, and not even necessarily, character stand-up, and not even necessarily in like giving myself a big name or a big persona. Just one person with a microphone on stage is an incredibly powerful thing. And I think not enough comedy is played with enough. That concept of having your voice and someone's attention for 15 minutes or so. And I like to kind of play with that and sort of think, what is just funny? Not what about my life is funny, or what can I see out of my bedroom window is funny. Just what makes people laugh, what is ridiculous. inspired, which I didn't realise until Joe mentioned this, Philomena Kunk.
Oh, yeah.
That sort of nature of just whatever is being said is hilarious. Just the language itself is just ridiculous. And that sort of led me to set up an open mic night, which I'm currently still running. I've not yet had to throw in the towel on that.
What's that called?
That's called Mr. Panda's Comedy Night.
Right.
Which stems from when I was in a two-prov sort of sketch group with a giant stuffed panda that I live with, called Mr. Panda, and we were the first interspecies one woman, one panda sketch group, and he's since been retired to just my co-host of the night, mainly because it was such a ridiculous prop to carry on trains. I don't drive, getting to gigs, the questions on the way there were just ridiculous, and for the sake of 5-minute spot where it was often hit, but when it was miss, I mean, you really take a bad gig a lot worse when you've lugged a panda halfway across the country. So I run that as your basic kind of open mic new material night. I'm happy to give anyone a gig as long as they're not horribly offensive or have wronged me in some way. But I'm also really keen for it to be alternative. Whatever you do that you call comedy, I'm here for. I think more improv should be at open mic nights, more sketch, like more musical comedy and musical magicians and all the very strange things we've had on over the time.
I've been to every single one, and my favourite performance from like all of them was one man came on and pretended to be the famous Hollywood star Carey Mulligan, and he just kept telling us he was Carey Mulligan. And as time went on, it became very clear he wasn't 100% sure who Carey Mulligan was.
Yeah, it was a semi-improvised. Just before he went on, he said to me, "Can I try something a bit new?" And I was like, "Sure, great. It's a free night. Pay what you feel. The audience get what they pay for. And they pay what they feel at the end, and you get whatever money's in the bucket. So it's your fault if the bucket's empty." And he sort of went on, and it was fantastic. Andrew Marsh, fantastic stand-up. And he had very little characterisation to be like Carey Mulligan. He had a glass of red wine, and every now and then he twirled as he said Carey Mulligan, and he took questions from the audience and answered them in this bizarre, and it was wonderful because the audience were hysterical, and it was really one of those moments of you wouldn't book someone who claimed that that's what they were going to do, and yet it was wonderful. And I think my love of improv and my love of the random and the unexpected really feeds into my stand-up. Anything that anyone does that they will stand on stage and make people laugh, I'm like, get on the show.
Because we're both big fans of Vine as well. This is something we share, and we miss it. We miss it terribly.
Yeah.
But so much of Vine, the source of Vine humour, that often it's just a quick subversion of expectation. 6 seconds, you basically have enough time to set up one quick premise and then a subversion. That is pretty much a summary of the kind of humour we both like, really.
I like to be surprised. I think that's which is a great reason to love improv, but also I think a great reason to love stand-up. I'm rubbish at watching stand-up though. I find that not to be sort of a hipster about it, but I find a lot of popular stand-ups very difficult to watch. I struggle to find comedians, sort of stand-up comedians that I really laugh at and I really love. And I tend to find it's the ones with like a great use of language, a great use of character, like your Victoria Woods, your Rick Mayles, just people whose entire bodies are like, a box of frogs and everything is so wonderfully random. And I really want to make more of that in my own stand-up, as well as sort of on the night.
And a lot of that comes from touching in with improv, touching in with sketch, and the three can learn so much from each other, and yet there can just be moments where we feel like we're at odds with each other. Stand up and sketch and improv can feel like we're all fighting for the same spots, but in reality there's so much to be gleaned from knowing and understanding all the other ways of doing comedy, as it were.
I'm a big fan of the I know Fat Penguin, I think, do a show like this. But also ASCAT.
The stand-up turns into scene suggestions.
So a stand-up does a bit of a set, a bit of a talk, sort of whatever it is, and then the improvisers do scenes based on that. And I think it's great because it's that kind of sort of Armando style, it's like the montage style, but you're also including a comedian. So the monologue at the beginning is going to be funny. And I think it's just a great example of how stand-up and improv, we don't need to fight. Capulets and Montagues, come on, let's come together and make something special.
Yeah, because a lot of that sense of kind of bumping shoulders is sometimes it can feel like as an improviser and stand-ups and sketch. I think particularly as an improviser you can get this sense, because obviously improv feels like it's constantly having to fight to have its position, because out of the three, it's probably the lesser known, and I feel like I'm not saying anything too radical by saying that. So sometimes you can feel, you look to stand-ups and look to sketch and you go, you easy trotters, to use non-swears. And you kind of sometimes do go, oh, you have it so easy, and that's not true at all. They have their own obstacles and their own things to get over. But on the days where you're not feeling very generous, you can kind of get a little bit like, I wish I could go to a different open mic every evening and stuff like that. But it's just they're different scenes and they operate differently. And on the days where I'm not, when I am feeling very generous and I'm open-minded, I realise that what we need to be doing is not trying to compare or contrast, but rather to bridge and bring together and connect and help each other.
Yeah. The skills are incredibly interchangeable as well. Like I got into improv first, but I think it massively helped me as a stand-up, and I think vice versa. Your ability to use language improves in your improv because of your stand-up, because you're always thinking about how things are funny and how you're saying them. But equally, improv's great for heckling. Thinking of things off the cuff, or when you forgot something, being able to bring it back. And I genuinely think that all stand-ups should do at least one improv class, and all improvisers should try stand-up at least once. I really think that...
Stand-up's great for game.
Oh,
stand-ups,
amazing.
Because unfortunately, stand-ups play games themselves to be funny, so it can make you feel that pressure. But it is that stand-ups have to, on their own, detect patterns in the real world. Yeah. So it's that observational, have you ever noticed how this is quite odd? Let's talk about this for a while. Let's map this to a new location. So, policemen are angry. Imagine if Roman guards were angry. Better than that. But like you do that. You map things in terms of game. You explore the if and thens. Like you do a lot of that, and that's really valuable to kind of do in the form of stand up, and then to be able to go, it's really relieving just to be able to do this as an improv scene instead.
Cool. And you're working on a duo together?
We
are, yes.
We very specifically came to your Improv
yes.
to do some learning on it.
It was pure joy. It was wonderful. Yeah, we what we thought was we live together, we work pretty much the same hours, we improvise together, we act together, and we thought we really don't see each other enough. Mm-hmm. So why not start a project we do in our own home in our spare time? Yeah. But yeah, no, it was great. We've always performed well together, right from being at uni together. We've always had a very similar kind of sense of humour. So we thought, let's set up something where we're in charge and we only have to sort of answer to ourselves and be on our own schedule.
We were very careful not to make this the reason or the basis of our two-prov group, but the fact that we are in a relationship massively influences the way that we improvise together, because obviously so much of improv is how well you know the other person, and
especially with a duo.
Yeah, in a duo. So the fact that we so regularly have conversations, we know each other. We do. We so regularly talk. Just sit and cut the cheese. That's not what that means. That level of kind of knowing each other hugely helps with improv, to the point that we do feel comfortable just dropping into a scene very easily, and we do sort of have that slight mind-reading element.
Yeah, we find sort of, when it's just the two of us, we get this almost like in-joke that gets into an in-joke, which gets into an in-joke, and you quite literally, if anyone was to hear it, it wouldn't be at all funny to them. But it is that kind of, we're so on the same page with someone. And I think we realise that while we love, obviously, being part of Strike and being part of bigger groups, wouldn't it be great to take what we feel is quite a sort of special relationship that we've got as performers together and go, let's turn this into a two-prov.
But we were very cautious not to make that the gimmick or the thing. Like, come and see a couple improvise together.
It's an easy thing to do because you'd easily make the mistake to think that anyone would care. You'd very easily make the mistake to go that people would find that cute or quirky or interesting, and of course it isn't really.
No, it's two people doing, I think, regardless, it is just still two people improvising.
Absolutely, it makes no difference, and it's meant as well that we've therefore not built up characters already. If you set yourselves up as man and wife almost, as it were.
Yeah.
Where is there to go from there? You've gendered your characters, you've given, such a familiar relationship, but where do you go from there? And I think that's really been kind of the starting point for us, is going, we want to do improv with just the two of us. How do you do improv, just the two of you?
Yep.
What kind of improv do we do? How do we get people to come and see us?
And part of the difficulty of that is obviously, again, being so far up in Sheffield, you don't get as many, companies coming through, so we didn't see that many two-prov before we decided to put together. I think the one we did see was Alex Keane and Rachel Thorne formed a long-form group in Sheffield that they're now touring through the UK called Between Us, which is fabulous. And we watched that, and that informed a lot of it, but it's very different to what we want to do. Theirs is a very theatrical, not necessarily comedic piece. As in, they are happy to make it comedy, but they're not focusing on that every time. It's more focusing on the relationships, and it was wonderful to watch. But because we're all about the comedy aspect, that's we have a passion and love for comedy, and we'll force it if we have to. We wanted to learn how you build that comedy and how you can lean into the comedy aspect. So we're still developing. We'll go home after this weekend and have
furious amounts of notes, haven't
just,
we?
Just have copious conversations about. God, we sound boring.
We really do.
We'll have so many conversations, and we'll it'll really help us start to build this. So you never know. You may see this group turn up in the next few months.
That sounds fantastic.
Yes.
Cool. Time for the big, final, exciting question. What is each other's signature improv move?
Ooh.
So I would say Joe's. Joe's is a particular character. I wish you could see an impression I can do of it. So Joe has a particular high status character that he does, who is very much every Lemony Snicket character ever. It's very much the slightly creepy Lord of the Manor, and it's got a sound, and its voice is very like this. And Joe will walk onto a scene, and he'll have his hands behind his back. He will look down his nose at you, and he will say, "Boy," and you absolutely know that this is where this scene is going. We've got creepy man in creepy house once again, and I love stock character Joe.
And as for Charlie, my favourite Charlie move, I can put it into a noise actually.
Oh,
Charlie's signature, and it's a whole character, but the best way to put it is a noise, and it's a oh, and as that sound happens, your eyes widen, and it's a character who is not enthusiastic about a situation but has to act enthusiastic, and the whole comedy of that character comes from just watching the tortured, because Charlie's strength in improv is definitely her characters, as in her characterization, her acting skill, because obviously with a theatre background, that ability to convey so much, particularly in the facial expression department. I word things so terribly sometimes, but that aspect. So watching a character that's so clearly uncomfortable but acting comfortable, and that torture in the face and all of that means that not much has to happen in the scene for the audience just to fall in love with the whole scene and just and enjoy following this character through so many situations they don't want to be involved with. It's just a really funny thing to watch.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for being guests on the Improv London podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yay!
I made this.
That's improv!